For weeks now, the Laurentian legacy media have deployed their very best propagandists to try to spin the Alberta Sovereignty Act and to make it seem as though it's some grand plot to form a breakaway state, to form a legislative coup. It's embarrassing how desperate they are to try and paint this as something that it isn't. Just look at the way this CBC journalist describes the Alberta Sovereignty Act and how the Premier is shunning democracy. He can't control himself. He's begging the federal government to do something before the bill has even passed. If the federal government is basically telling you to calm down and relax, then you've really gone a bit too far here. But after all, I bet you that's exactly what they want of David Cochrane.
Danielle Smith is coming under fire for shunning democracy. Her long-promised Sovereignty Act is supposed to shield the province from federal laws, but it also contains sweeping new powers for her cabinet, including the power to change provincial laws without going through the legislature. But on its face, you have a piece of legislation that allows a province to ignore federal law, compel a string of provincial agencies to essentially do the same. I mean, when you look at its intention, I mean, how is that acceptable in the Canadian system of government?
It's probably unprecedented in what it pretends to be able to do. This is some kind of legislation that we haven't seen in provincial legislatures before, but provincial governments introduce bills in their legislatures all the time.
Not like this, though. We've never seen anything like this before.
Right, so it doesn't mean we have to rush around to some judgment. We don't have to get ahead of our skis on this. Let's hear the voices in Alberta. Let's see ultimately what the legislature of Alberta decides to do with this.
Not like this before. How is this acceptable in Canada? How can we allow this? How can we tolerate this? By the way, that was the same David Cochrane who graciously accepted a bowl of poutine from Justin Trudeau for being a really good CBC journalist, for being a really good propagandist for Justin Trudeau, and for all of his hard work, the Prime Minister gave him a poutine. How embarrassing, how cringeworthy. But perhaps the best example of the legacy media showing their true colors when it came to covering the Alberta Sovereignty Act was when the CBC put together an at-issue panel without one Albertan. They discussed the Alberta Sovereignty Act without having the voice of one Albertan on the panel. Instead, they had Rosemary Barton leading the conversation, the true paragon of journalistic ethics. They had Andrew Antisocial Yob Coyne, and then they had the rest of the CBC panel just there to criticize the Alberta Sovereignty Act without having one Albertan there to defend the act itself. Classic CBC, doing the bidding for their masters and not for the Canadians that pay for their salary.
I mean, she believes a lot of strange things, and it wouldn't be much of a stretch to add this to it. But it's clearly unconstitutional. It clearly involves arrogating to the province powers that it does not have to sit in judgment of federal law, to effectively decide which laws it's going to obey and which laws it's not going to order, not just to not enforce it, but to order everyone in the broader public sector to basically disobey the law, I guess on pain of being found, guilty of obeying the law. It's fantasy land.
It seemed at best amateurs and at worst completely, lacking understanding of how the Constitution works.